Today we're going to learn the story of Lovedrops. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Alright, so when you guys think Jimi Hendrix, what guitar pops into your head? It's probably a Stratocaster. However, he did occasionally use Gibson and other branded guitars, and perhaps the most iconic outside of a Stratocaster was the Lovedrops Flying V. It started life as a 1967 Flying V, of which only around 111 of them were registered on shipping ledgers. 67 in Cherry, 44 in Tobacco Sunburst. That's what his started life as, but then he painted it black and did the very intricate artwork with some nail polish, which birthed the guitar as we know it today. But before we get too deep into the history as to what happened to it after that, let's go ahead and take a look at this guitar. This is a 2006 recreation that the Gibson Custom Shop and Bruce Kunkel did to recreate his very iconic piece. However, we don't just have any regular one, because you're going to notice, if you look at the cases that the other ones have, this one does not have the traditionally correct case, and that's because this is an artist proof. So what is an artist proof, you're probably asking yourself? Is it a prototype? Is it a pre-production run guitar? Honestly, it can mean different things on different runs. However, in this case, since it was created after Hendrix had passed in 1970, this one was likely part of the Hendrix estate's allotment of the run, because obviously, if you're going to put the Hendrix name on something, his estate is going to get something out of it too. So no, Jimi never had this guitar, but the odds of Janie or somebody within his estate or like a higher up representative getting this guitar and then selling it at a later date, yep, that is entirely possible. So for example, their contract might have stated that as part of using this name, we get paid X amount of money and we get X amount of guitars. In this episode, I documented a Zakk Wylde artist guitar, and that one was famously left by Zakk because he was just done with Gibson. So they were later sold off to Gibson employees. But here we can see the very intricate artwork that was done on here. It's honestly not all that crazy, and they only put any type of finish work on the front and the sides of the instrument. But I always wanted to know what this thing was called, and when I first saw this, I was like, yes, it does have an official title. This is why it's called Lovedrops, is because Hendrix painted that on the side down here. The other side really doesn't have too much going on for it, but that is what gave it its iconic name. Alright, so we already established this was a 67 Flying V, but Hendrix used it all the way until 1969. Most notably used during the BBC Radio 1 sessions, the Electric Ladyland album, and very famously on the All Along the Watchtower solo. However, he only had it for about 2 years because he then later gifted it to Mick Cox of Heir Apparent. He did not like all the psychedelic artwork on it, so he had it refinished in black again. And he owned it for about twice as long as Hendrix. He sold it in about 1973. And from that point into the 90s, it's really not sure where this guitar was all that time, but it ended up in a guitar store where a David Brewis purchased it, thinking it might be the original Hendrix, even though at the time the shop didn't think it was. But after many years of using it and trying to find people who might be able to vouch for the story, because he kept finding more and more evidence that might suggest that it could be Hendrix's original one, he eventually got enough people to say, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's Hendrix's guitar. So he painstakingly copied the original artwork back onto the guitar, and then it later sold around 2003. Now, what happened between then and there, I'm not sure, but it's now currently housed in the Met Museum and Gallery. But what's interesting from there is Gibson actually contacted David to see if he wanted to do the paintwork for their new Inspired by series run of Hendrix that they were doing in 2006. Now, Gibson wanted to make 300 of them, and he had to decline because he didn't feel he could pump out 300 of those in less than a year. But he did help them with the patterns and designs, because he worked with like actual photographers that were there that had great scanned prints, so he worked with them to help Bruce Kunkel create these artworks. And as a gift, Gibson gave him production prototype number 1. So for this 2006 Inspired by series, there were 300 replicas made. They were launched on March 24th at a list price of $12,300, street price of $8,000. And if you wonder what they're going to run you today, well, typically between 8 to 12K, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, just depends on everything. So if you count 8,000 street price for inflation, that's about 11,800, so they performed okay. But this was not the first signature Hendrix model. What predated this was a 1991 Hall of Fame edition of his custom Flying V from 1969 that was done up as a Gibson USA like limited edition thing, and Lovedrops was the first custom shop. However, then there was the 2009 low-end Strat copies, and then the custom shop Stratocaster Gibson version that didn't quite fully make it, but that didn't stop me from documenting one of them in this episode. And then just very recently, we had a 2020 custom shop recreation edition of the 1991 Hall of Fame edition of his custom-ordered 1969 Flying V. That was a fun one to document. I was glad they did that. And then the slightly controversial SG Custom that he didn't really use all that often, but hey, let's give him a signature one anyways. So needless to say, this thing has quite the interesting history behind it. It's not just a Flying V that has been painted. I mean, there's tons of people who do these paint jobs on like regular 67 USA reissues, or even a faded series Flying V. There are a lot cheaper ways to get a guitar that looks like this. If you're buying one of these custom shop ones, it's because you want it because Bruce Kunkel painted it, or because you want a collectible Hendrix model that's an official release. Honestly, I'm a little bit underwhelmed so far. Like, I was expecting this paint job to be like really crazy, but to be honest, I think if you just watch this video and take some nice stills, I think most people could get pretty close to this. Like, maybe not exact and get all the nuances that Hendrix had. I'll get some good shots of this for you guys because that's the hardest part to find online. But there's nothing on the back of this, and that makes sense because Hendrix wasn't really showing the back of his guitar too much. But basically, you've got all the 67 specs, and late 60s Flying Vs are very rare and expensive guitars on the market today, so just having a custom shop reissue of one of those is pretty cool too. So to learn more about the 2006 Lovedrops Gibson Flying V, let's go ahead and throw it on the workbench to see if there's anything hiding underneath that pickguard. Will it have a painted design under it or not? Inside the Lovedrops V, let's go ahead and appreciate this for what it is. So earlier I was saying, I think I could pull off this paint job. I think the hardest part would be getting the brush strokes exactly correct, because where Bruce's mastery comes into play is like little things like this, to make it look natural and not like, oh, I just touched this area up to make it look like a natural brush stroke. Bruce helped me out in a very dark period of my guitar journey, and I've always felt that he's been undersung in the Gibson history books because he's been a part of so many things. So whenever there's an episode that I can bring up his name, I always like to do that for him, because he is the artisan behind so many awesome limited edition releases. So hopefully, if you're trying to paint your own tribute, this video will help you get close. Now, if you're trying to make illegal replicas and sell them as the real thing, you're gonna get what's coming to you, my friend. But as far as the answer of, do you have to paint underneath the pickguard or remove it at all? Well, if you want to be custom shop correct, no. However, when I removed the pickguard, the entire guitar changed color. This now appears to be more of an oxblood finish in person. There's a little bit of a red tint to it, which is really exciting because that makes me think, did they actually paint these a tobacco sunburst and then paint it over black? Because that's almost the vibe that this has got going on for it, just like Hendrix's original. Now, I can't say one way or the other if that's true or not, but that's kind of what this one looks like. But here you can see the neck pickup cavity route. Looks like we've got a short neck tenon. Here's our bridge pickup route and our route for the electronics with a ground wire going through here that gets sat on by the trem unit. But it looks like we're rocking 57 classic pickups in here. They have the patent applied for water slide decals. As far as the pickup covers, they're done up in chrome. And we've got our typical Gibson historic style pots with little ceramic capacitors. Pretty basic stuff in here. As far as pickup readings, our bridge is 7.89 k ohms, neck 7.95, and then our middle position for fun, 3.96. And if you're modding yours out to look like this, you're going to want to get this key detail right. He has a white switch tip on his. You don't see that on too many Gibson guitars. And you'll want your silver topper witch hat knobs with a 3-ply white, black, white pickguard. But it's really cool that we still have the part of the Inspired By series sticker on here. I mean, most people would just take that off right away, but that just tells you how little this one has ever been played. Something special about this model, to get correct late 60s Gibson specs, they use nylon saddles. So that's something you might want to try if you're trying to paint up your own one. And this one is the original that reads Gibson ABR1. Here's a look at our trem system. It's just one of your vintage style ones. You'd find them on Melody Makers too. They secure using 3 screws down here. Then that metal bar just slides onto that other part. You can remove that if you need to. Then you've got your big walrus tooth thing here. Pretty primitive design. Does it work? Yeah. Is it the best for tuning stability? No, but they're cool. It's interesting how it's leaving like a strange haze on the finish. And no, this chip in the finish did not happen from me removing it. That was already there. I saw that before I removed it, so I figured, well, if that's already there, we might as well just take it off. It's likely just from the pressure of this system over the years. But moving on from our mahogany body, we've got a mahogany neck with a rosewood fretboard. Pretty standard in construction. The neck doesn't stick up quite as much as the 70s ones, but we've got the typical 24 3/4 inch scale length, and you've got your regular 22 medium jumbo style frets here, with a nut measuring a skinny 1.59 inches. Then that increases to 1.98, so it's a rather thin feeling neck that way, not as wide. But our first fret neck depth is 0.88, then that increases to 1.01. So it's a pretty interesting neck profile being ultra rounded like that. As far as the headstock, if you remove the truss rod cover, there's no way to even tell this is a Gibson. Well, by name anyways. That's why I've always liked his other Flying V, because it has the logo going in a strange way, and it's actually inlaid into the headstock. But here's that truss rod cover. It is 3-ply, and you got a shiny Gibson on it in gold, with black on the back. Moving on to the back here, there's not much to look at. However, now I can really see that I think this is a dark oxblood finish. I don't think it's showing through in the camera very well, but there is just a very light red tint to this black hue, so that's something I did not know about the Lovedrops V. Apparently, it's not pitch black, at least not for the custom shops. So I guess if you're doing a complete refin of like a different color Flying V and you want to get it even closer to correct, put just a little bit of like a red tint over it, but not a lot, because it's very subtle. You really have to get it in the light just to see it. But we've got a Strat button in the base of the heel. The other one's down here. And a characteristic late 60s Flying V thing is this giant heel. It's just part of their charm. And here we can see the back of our neck until we get to our serial number. They're always handwritten. In this era anyways. Jimi Hendrix Artist Proof number 5. So for me personally, in a collector standpoint, I would probably give these a 25 to a 50% premium over a regular one. They are not as valuable as a true prototype. That's my opinion, and it also depends how many artist proofs are out there. Like, is it the Zakk Wylde SGVs? Those things are well traded quite often. However, the Hendrix artist proofs, this is the first time I've seen one of these things show up, so that's why I knew I had to pick it up to document it. I'm kind of surprised this got sold out of the estate. But as far as its weight, it is 6.5 pounds. Not too bad. Let's go ahead and plug it in, and I'm sorry, I cannot even give you 3 notes of a Hendrix song without Janie trying to take all the money for the video, so I've learned my lesson in the last episode of Hendrix. So we'll get you something here. Alright, so I really like the neck pickup out of this one. The bridge pickup just sounds like it's not even there. Now, to be fair, the neck pickup is way closer to the strings. I could adjust that. But I like both of them together. It's got a nice chiminess to it. Sludge definitely comes to life with a little bit of dirt. And the neck's got some good lead tones too. Now that we know all about the Hendrix Lovedrops Flying V, what are my final thoughts on this? I've really been looking forward to making this review and demo for such a long time. I was just waiting to find a special one or one at a good price, and I found a special one at least. This one's definitely a little bit more expensive than your regular version. But overall, I like it, but I wouldn't necessarily pay what the market wants for these just as a player, because you can get so many similar guitars. Like, do these 57 Classics sound fantastic? Yes. Do I love the fact that this is a factory paint job and they only made 300? Of course. This is mainly a collector's guitar though. If you want something that looks like this and you want to play it, just get yourself a regular 67 reissue style Gibson USA. That's going to run you between like 15 to 2,000 in the current day market. Or maybe even go as crazy as just getting a faded series one to save yourself a little money. And then just go ahead and give it your all. Go ahead and try to paint it, or hire an artist to paint it. Because it's not as complicated as like painting the Fool or something, right? That's a pretty extensive paint job on that one. This is just, you know, a little bit of flower motif and stuff along the edges. The trade-off being that you're not going to have perfect 67 specs as far as, you know, the construction of the guitar, but you're going to have something very similar. Because that is what makes this guitar special to play, is the neck profile and the construction of everything. So it is vastly different than the guitar I told you just to buy and then modify yourself. But Hendrix signature guitars are always expensive. Alright, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow for another Freaky V episode. Take care. If you really enjoyed tonight's Flying V episode, why don't you check out this one? It's the modern Flying V. I've got 2 episodes you can choose from. One, an ebony prism from when it was first released, and then a gold prism one a few years after. It's amazing how the market and acceptance of this model has changed.